The first time Jack Lucky Sullivan saw the red albatros, he was trying not to vomit. It wasn't fear, not exactly. It was the sheer, gut-churning chaos of his first real dogfight. One moment, the sky over Verdun was a peaceful, endless blue. The next, it was a screaming, twisting nightmare of machine guns, smoke, and diving biplanes. Jack's Newport 17 shuddered around him, a fragile cage of wood and canvas held together by wire and a prayer. The Gnome rotary engine roared inches from his face, spitting castor oil smoke that made his eyes water and his stomach do somersaults. He was 20 years old, a farm boy from Iowa who'd never seen an ocean until he sailed to France. He'd come for adventure, for the romance of flying he'd read about in penny dreadfuls. The reality was colder, louder, and smelled of gasoline and fear. Lucky, brake left, brake left. The voice of his wingman, a grizzled Frenchman named Pierre, crackled in his ears, tinny and frantic. Jack wrenched the stick, his little Newport rolling violently. Tracer fire, glowing a malevolent green, zipped past his wingtip. He caught a glimpse of a black-crossed Fokker, its pilot a goggled skull in the cockpit. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. This was it. This was how he died, a million miles from the cornfields. And then, everything changed. The Fokker chasing him suddenly exploded into a fireball. 1 second it was there, the next, a cloud of splinters and flame. Jack stared, stunned. What had happened? He hadn't fired a shot. Then he saw it. Sailing through the smoke and debris, serene as a shark in clear water, was another German plane, an Albatros D.3. But unlike the drab green and brown of the others, this one was painted a brilliant, shocking, impossible crimson. From its propeller hub to its tail, it was the color of fresh blood. It flew past him, so close he could see the details, the subtle wood grain on the propeller, the neat rows of rivets. In the cockpit, the pilot turned his head. He wasn't a skull. He was a man, with a sharp, clean-shaven jaw under his goggles. He didn't shake his fist or scream. He simply looked at Jack. He raised one leather-gloved hand, not in a wave, but in a slow, deliberate gesture. A single finger tapped twice against the side of his helmet, right by his temple. A casual, almost bored acknowledgement. Then the red albatros rolled onto its back and dove away, vanishing into the haze as if it had never been there. The fight was over. The remaining German planes, spooked by the sudden destruction of their comrade and the appearance of the Red Hunter, disengaged. The sky went quiet, save for the moaning wind and the sputter of Jack's engine. Back at the airfield of the Lafayette Escadrille, a collection of rickety hangars and a dusty bar, the mood was somber. They'd lost 2 men. Jack sat on an upturned crate, a glass of cheap wine in his hand, not drinking. He couldn't get the image out of his head. The red plane, the comm pilot, that infuriatingly casual tap. That was him, Pierre said, dropping onto the crate beside him. His face was grim. The Albatros. Albatros? Jack asked. That's what we call him. L'Albatros. A bird of ill omen. His real name is Erich von Adler. Count Erich von Adler. They say he has 30 confirmed kills. Maybe more. 30. Jack whispered. The number was unimaginable. He's a Jagdstaffel commander. An ace of aces. And that red plane, it's a message. He's not hiding. He's inviting you to try. He's the hunter, and we are all his prey. Pierre took a long swig from his own glass. Consider yourself lucky, mon ami. He didn't come for you today. He was just tidying up, taking a kill that was in his territory. You were just the mouse the cat decided to let live. Jack felt a hot flush of anger wash over the cold fear. The mouse. That's what he was. He'd been frozen, helpless, and this aristocrat in his red machine had saved him without a second thought, then dismissed him with a tap to the head. It wasn't chivalry. It was contempt. That night, Jack couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, listening to the distant thunder of the artillery, a constant reminder of the war a few miles away. He saw the red plane every time he closed his eyes. The fear began to curdle, to transform into something else, something harder and more determined. A fierce, burning rivalry was born not from a fight, but from a humiliation. He wasn't just fighting for France anymore, or for adventure. He was fighting for a second look from the man in the red albatros. A look of respect, not pity. He would become an ace. He would hunt the hunter, and he would make sure the next time they met, Count Erich von Adler would not just tap his helmet. He would remember the name Jack Lucky Sullivan. The days bled into weeks, and the sky over the Western Front became Jack's new home, a vast, cold classroom where failure meant a fiery grave. The initial terror didn't vanish, but it was slowly forged into a sharp, focused edge. He was no longer the farm boy from Iowa. He was becoming a pilot of the Lafayette Escadrille. His Newport 17, which he'd christened Daisy Cutter after the farm implement he'd grown up with, felt less like a cage and more like an extension of his own body. He learned her quirks, the way she shimmied at high speed, the exact amount of rudder needed in a tight turn. He spent hours with the ground crew, a tough but dedicated bunch of French mechanics, learning how to clean his single Vickers machine gun until it gleamed, how to synchronize it to fire through the propeller without shooting his own plane to pieces. His mentor, Pierre, was a hard teacher. "Forget the romance, Lucky," he'd bark, sketching maneuvers in the dirt with a stick. "This is not a duel. It is a butcher's job. You see an enemy, you get on his tail. You get close, so close you can smell his engine oil. Then you shoot. You do not wave. You do not salute. You kill him." Jack took it all in. He practiced until his muscles ached, drilling the Immelmann turn and the chandelle until he could perform them in his sleep. He studied the tactical reports, the diagrams of German formations. And in every one, a particular notation kept appearing, wrote Albatros gesichtet. Red Albatros sighted. The legend of the Albatros grew with every passing day. He was a phantom, a story the veteran pilots told over watered-down wine. He never flew in large formations, always hunting alone or with a single wingman. He was said to be unervingly precise, his attacks surgical. He didn't engage in wild, chaotic dogfights. He selected a target, dove from the sun, and was often gone before his victim even knew he was there. Jack's first kill came on a crisp, clear morning. It was against a two-seater German observation plane, a slow, clumsy-looking thing they called a Hun bus. It was buzzing calmly over the French lines, mapping artillery positions, its crew oblivious. "Lucky, you take it," Pierre's voice crackled over the radio. "We'll cover you. Remember, close." Jack's mouth went dry. This was it. He pushed the stick forward, the nose of the daisy cutter dropping. The wind screamed in the wires. He came up from behind and below, the classic blind spot. He could see the two German crewmen now, the pilot and the observer in the back seat, who was leaning over his camera. They were just men, doing a job. His finger hovered over the trigger. He saw a flash of movement. The observer had spotted him and was swinging his machine gun around. There was no time for thought. Jack squeezed the trigger. The Vickers gun chattered, a brutal jackhammer sound. Tracers lanced out. He saw splinters fly from the German plane's fuselage. The observer slumped. The plane nosed down, trailing a thin stream of black smoke, and began a long, spiraling fall to earth. Jack pulled up, his heart thundering. He felt no triumph, only a hollow, cold feeling in the pit of his stomach. He had just killed two men. "Good kill, Lucky," Pierre said, his voice flat and professional. "Now let's go home. The coffee is getting cold." Back on the ground, the others clapped him on the back. He was officially an ace in the making. He had blooded his plane, but the image of that observer, a man just doing his job, stayed with him. This was the reality Pierre had tried to drill into him. It was a butcher's job. His encounters with the red Albatros became more frequent, yet they were always fleeting, maddening glimpses. He'd see the crimson speck high above, a vulture circling a battle, but von Adler never dove. He just watched. Sometimes, after a messy, victorious dogfight, Jack would look up and see the red plane banking away, as if the German ace had been a spectator at a play and the show was now over. It was during a patrol near the Somme that it happened again. Jack and his flight were jumped by a group of four Fokkers. It was a brutal, close-quarters brawl. Planes twisted and turned, guns chattering. Jack managed to get on the tail of a Fokker, firing a long burst that sent it spinning down. As he pulled out of his dive, a shadow fell over him. It was the red Albatros. It was right there, maybe 50 yards off his wingtip, flying in perfect formation with him. The sun glinted off the blood-red wings. Jack could clearly see von Adler in the cockpit. The German ace wasn't looking at the battle. He was looking directly at Jack. This time, there was no casual tap of the helmet. He simply stared, his gaze intense, analytical. It felt like being examined under a microscope. For a long, heart-stopping second, they flew side by side, the American and the German, locked in a silent, airborne standoff. Jack's hand twitched toward his trigger, but he knew it was useless. To turn and fight would be to present his broadside. He was frozen. Then, von Adler did something extraordinary. He raised his left hand, not in a tap, but in a slow, deliberate salute. A gesture from one warrior to another. Then, he gently pushed his stick forward and dove away, disappearing into a bank of cloud. Jack flew back to the airfield, his mind racing. The salute hadn't felt like contempt. It felt like an acknowledgement. The mouse had learned to squeak, and the cat had taken notice. The hollow feeling from his first kill was suddenly filled with a new, dangerous emotion, pride. He had been seen by his rival. The game had truly begun. And Jack, Lucky Sullivan, was no longer just playing to survive. He was playing to win. The silent salute from the red Albatros changed everything. It was a spark that lit a fire in Jack's belly, hotter and more dangerous than any he'd felt before. He wasn't just another pilot anymore. He was an opponent worthy of a gesture. And with that recognition came a terrifying, thrilling responsibility. He had to prove that gesture right. He became a student of one man. While other pilots played cards or wrote letters home, Jack pored over every scrap of intelligence on von Adler. He talked to the few pilots who had tangled with the Albatros and lived. He learned that von Adler favored the dive from the sun, attack, using the glare as a perfect shield. He learned the Albatros was slightly faster in a straight line, but his lighter, more agile Newport could turn inside it. He learned that von Adler never, ever chased a damaged plane down to the deck. He would break off, letting a crippled enemy attempt a landing. It was a strange, chivalrous code in a brutally unchivalrous war. Their encounters evolved from fleeting glimpses into a deadly, personal ballet. It was as if they were the only two pilots in the vast French sky. They'd find each other, often high above the fray, and their private war would begin. The first time they truly dueled, it lasted 10 minutes, though it felt like a lifetime. Jack saw the red speck high above and climbed, his engine screaming in protest. Von Adler saw him coming and didn't run. He waited. They circled each other, two hawks sizing each other up. Then von Adler struck a lightning-fast dive. Jack rolled away, the stream of German bullets tearing through the space his plane had just occupied. He pulled back on the stick, his vision graying out from the G-forces as he hauled the Newport into a steep climb. The red Albatros shot past, and for a glorious second, Jack was above him. He shoved the stick forward, diving onto von Adler's tail. He had him. His finger tightened on the trigger. But the German ace was impossibly good. He didn't try to outrun him. He simply kicked the rudder and stood the Albatros on its wingtip, executing a turn so tight it seemed to defy physics. Jack overshot, his own bullets slicing through empty air. And just like that, the hunter became the hunted. It went on like that, a dizzying, gut-wrenching series of dives, climbs, and turns. They were perfectly matched, a lock and key of destruction. Jack's flying became instinctual, his mind and body fused with the daisy cutter. He could anticipate von Adler's moves, and the German, in turn, seemed to read his. They were dancing, a beautiful, terrible dance where a single misstep meant a funeral pyre. The duel ended without a conclusion. A flight of German two-seaters stumbled into their private arena, and von Adler, with one last look at Jack, broke off and shepherded his countrymen away. Jack let him go, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the stick. He was drenched in sweat, his lungs burning. He had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back, and they had both nodded in grim understanding. Back on the ground, the legend of their rivalry grew. The other pilots in the escadrille started calling von Adler Jack's ghost. They'd see the red Albatros and radio. "Lucky, your pen pal is here." But the joking masked a deep unease. They all knew what this meant. This was no longer about the war. This was personal. One evening, Pierre found Jack alone, staring at a map. "This is a dangerous game you are playing, mon ami," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "He's just another pilot," Jack said, but the words rang hollow. "No," Pierre shook his head. "He is not. You are tying your soul to his. In this war, that is a luxury we cannot afford. You must be able to kill him without a second thought. Can you do that?" Jack didn't answer. He thought of the salute, the intense, professional stare, the flawless skill. He thought of the way Von Adler broke off his attacks, showing a mercy that felt alien in this slaughterhouse. Killing a faceless observer in a Hun bus was one thing. Killing the man in the red Albatros felt like destroying a masterpiece. The final straw came on a milk run, a simple patrol over quiet lines. They were jumped, not by the Albatros, but by a whole jasta of Fokkers. It was a trap. The sky exploded. Jack saw Pierre's Newport take a direct hit to the engine. It coughed out a plume of black smoke and began to lose altitude. "Pierre, get out. Jump!" Jack screamed into his radio, swerving to try and cover his friend. He saw Pierre struggling with his harness. The plane was spinning now, a leaf in a tornado. And then a Fokker lashed onto Pierre's tail, its twin Spondaus spitting fire. The bullets tore into the crippled Newport. Jack watched, helpless, as his friend, his mentor, the man who had taught him everything, was shot to pieces. The plane didn't explode. It just came apart, scattering wood, canvas, and a man's life across the sky. A cold, pure rage filled Jack, washing away every doubt, every shred of chivalrous thought. He turned his plane, not to flee, but to hunt. He chased down the Fokker that had killed Pierre, ignoring the tracers zipping past his own cockpit. He got so close he could see the surprised look on the German pilot's face before he squeezed the trigger and held it down, hosing the Fokker with bullets until it shattered into 1,000 pieces. He was still circling the wreckage, his breath coming in ragged sobs, when he saw it. The red Albatros. It was hovering at the edge of the battle, watching. Von Adler had seen it all. He had seen Pierre die, and he had done nothing. The look they shared across the empty sky was no longer one of respect. It was one of pure, undiluted hatred. The dance was over. The hunt was on. Jack, Lucky Sullivan, was no longer playing a game. He was going to kill Count Erich von Adler. The war inside Jack's heart was now fiercer than the one in the skies above France. Pierre's death had carved out something soft inside him and filled the hollow with cold, hard iron. The charming farm boy from Iowa was gone, replaced by a grim, silent hunter whose only purpose was etched in crimson across his mind. He became a terror. The other pilots in the escadrille started calling him the Reaper behind his back, and not as a joke. He flew with a reckless, calculated fury that was terrifying to watch. He took risks that made veteran pilots blanch, diving into formations of 3 or 4 enemy planes alone, his guns blazing. His kill tally climbed, but there was no celebration, no painted flags on the side of the Daisy Cutter. Each kill was just a step closer to the only one that mattered. He was haunted. At night, he didn't see Von Adler's face. He saw Pierre's Newport disintegrating. He heard the silence on the radio where his friend's voice should have been. And superimposed over it all was the image of the red Albatros, a passive, watching spectator. That was the part that festered. Von Adler could have intervened. He could have driven off the Fokker. He had the skill, the reputation. But he hadn't. His code of chivalry, it seemed, didn't extend to Frenchmen. Their encounters now were no longer a dance. They were brutal, savage affairs. The professional respect was scorched away, leaving only the raw intent to kill. They met over the blasted, crater-pocked landscape of no man's land, and their dogfights were short, violent, and merciless. Jack developed a new tactic, one born of pure hatred. He would ignore every other German plane, climbing, always climbing, searching the sea of clouds for that flash of red. When he found it, he would attack without warning, without the circling prelude. He'd dive from whatever position he had, guns chattering, forcing Von Adler into desperate, undignified defensive maneuvers. Once, he came so close he could hear the roar of the Albatros's Mercedes engine over his own. He saw the stitching on Von Adler's flight jacket, the chip in his goggles. He fired, and saw his bullets rip a line of holes along the red fuselage. It wasn't a killing blow, but it was a hit, a wound. The Albatros trailed a wisp of smoke as it corkscrewed away into a cloud. Jack felt a jolt of savage satisfaction. He had drawn blood, but Von Adler was a phantom. He was always just out of reach, his skill a shield that seemed impenetrable. He began to anticipate Jack's new, reckless style, using it against him. He'd lured Jack into dives that took him too low, into the murderous range of the Archie anti-aircraft guns on the ground, forcing Jack to break off, or be shredded by flak. The German ace was playing a colder, more patient game, letting Jack's own rage exhaust him. The strain was wearing Jack down. He wasn't sleeping. He jumped at the sound of a car backfiring. The carefree, Lucky Sullivan was a ghost. His commander pulled him aside. "Jack, you need a rest. A week in Paris. Go see a girl, drink some real wine. You're no good to anyone like this. You're going to get yourself killed." Jack just shook his head, his eyes fixed on some distant point on the horizon. "I can't, sir. Not until it's finished." The weather turned foul, grounding both sides for 3 long, agonizing days. Low, leaden clouds pressed down on the airfield, and a cold drizzle fell without end. It was a prison. Jack paced the hangar like a caged animal, his mind replaying every near miss, every failed shot. The red Albatros was everywhere, in the pattern of the rain on the windows, in the coals of the fireplace, in his dreams. On the 4th morning, the sky cleared, revealing a pristine, washed blue heaven. It was the kind of day made for flying. The call came for a high-altitude photo reconnaissance escort mission. It was dangerous work, flying slow, straight lines over enemy territory. A perfect hunting ground. As they crossed the lines, Jack's eyes constantly scanned the empty sky. He felt it in his bones. Today was the day. The air felt different, charged with a strange electricity. Then he saw it. Not a speck, but a shape, clear and sharp against the sun. The red Albatros. It wasn't alone. It led a flight of 4 other Albatros scouts, all in standard camouflage. They were higher, and they had the sun at their backs. The fight was instant and chaotic. The German flight dove on the reconnaissance plane and its escorts. Jack ignored them all. He had one target. He shoved the throttle forward and climbed, aiming not for where von Adler was, but for where he would be. They met in the middle of the swirling dogfight, as if drawn together by an invisible wire. There was no salute, no circling. They flew straight at each other, head-on, a medieval joust at 100 miles an hour. Jack could see the twin Spandau machine guns on the Albatros's nose glittering. He saw von Adler's head, helmeted and goggled, perfectly still in the cockpit. Neither man flinched. Neither man turned away. The air between them became a tunnel of screaming metal and fire. Tracers from both planes streaked past each other, a lethal firework display. The sound was deafening, a continuous, hammering roar. Jack felt his Newport shudder as bullets tore through his wings. A wire snapped and whipped against the fuselage like an angry snake. Something hot stung his cheek. He ignored it, his finger locked on the trigger, his entire world focused on the red plane growing larger and larger in his sights. This was it. No tricks, no maneuvers. A test of pure nerve. He was no longer a pilot. He was a bullet, and he was going to hit his mark. Time didn't just slow down, it shattered. Each millisecond stretched into an eternity. Jack was no longer thinking, no longer even breathing. He was a single, focused point of will, a finger on a trigger, an eye looking down a gun sight. The roaring of the engines, the hammering of the guns, it all faded into a dull, distant hum. The only thing that existed was the blood-red shape of the Albatros, filling his vision, consuming the world. He saw his own tracer rounds, glowing a soft orange, arcing toward the German plane. And he saw von Adler's, a malevolent green, streaming back at him. They were connected by these 2 brilliant, deadly threads. A bullet smashed his windscreen, the perspex exploding inward in a shower of crystalline shards. A sliver cut deep into his forehead, and warm blood instantly sheeted down the side of his face, blinding his left eye. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He saw his bullets find their mark. They stitched a line across the red Albatros's engine cowling. For a heart-stopping second, nothing happened. Then, a plume of thick, black oil smoke erupted from the Mercedes engine, splattering across the pristine red wings. The Albatros's engine, which had been a steady roar, coughed, sputtered, and then fell silent. The head-on charge was over. The 2 planes, having passed within feet of each other, were now flying away, their fates sealed. Jack hauled back on the stick, his Newport groaning in protest, and banked hard to sea. The red Albatros was no longer a predator. It was a wounded bird. It was gliding, losing altitude, its pilot fighting the dead controls to keep it level. The elegant, terrifying hunter was falling from the sky. A savage, primal scream tore from Jack's throat, a raw mix of triumph, grief, and released fury. For Pierre, he yelled into the empty, rushing air, the words stolen by the wind. It was over. He had won. He expected to feel a wave of satisfaction, the cold closure of vengeance. But it didn't come. As he circled the dying Albatros, watching it begin a slow, spiraling descent toward the shell-cratered earth of no man's land, a strange emptiness filled him. The fire in his belly went out, leaving only cold ashes. The other German planes, seeing their leader fall, broke off the engagement and fled. The sky, moments ago a cacophony of violence, was suddenly, unnervingly quiet. Jack's escorts radioed him. "Lucky, he's done for. Let's go home. The Archie will get you if you stay so low." But Jack didn't listen. He followed the gliding Albatros down, descending with it as if in a funeral procession. He saw it make a rough, clumsy landing, its wheels catching on a crater lip, causing it to nose over with a sickening crunch of wood and fabric. It came to rest in the middle of that blasted, empty wilderness between the trenches, a splash of bright red on a canvas of mud and death. And then he saw movement. The cockpit canopy was shoved open. A figure, clad in black leather, clumsily hauled itself out and slumped onto the broken wing. Von Adler was alive. Without a second thought, without any conscious decision at all, Jack pushed his own stick forward. He lined up his Newport with a relatively flat stretch of mud a few hundred yards from the wreck. It was an insane risk. The ground was soft, cratered, littered with debris. He could snap a landing gear, flip over, and be stranded right beside his greatest enemy. He touched down, the daisy cutter bouncing violently, the wheels squelching in the mud. He cut the engine. The silence that followed was absolute and deafening. The only sounds were the tink-tink of his cooling engine and the distant, lazy thump of artillery. He climbed out, his legs wobbly. He drew his sidearm, a standard-issue Colt .45, and began to trudge through the mud toward the wreck. What was he doing? Was he going to capture him? Take the great Count Erich von Adler as a prize? Or was he going to walk up to him and put a bullet in his head to finally, definitively, finish it? He reached the overturned Albatros. Von Adler was sitting on the lower wing, one arm clutched to his chest, his flying helmet off. Blood matted his blonde hair. He looked up as Jack approached. He wasn't afraid. He looked tired. Deeply, profoundly tired. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, found Jack's. They flickered to the gun in Jack's hand, then back to his face. "So," Von Adler said in perfect, if slightly accented, English. His voice was calm, steady, though laced with pain. "The farmer's boy from America. You fly, with much passion." He gave a weak, pained smile. "I knew it would be you. Or no one." Jack stood there, the mud sucking at his boots, the gun heavy in his hand. He looked at the man he had hated for so long. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a ghost. He was just a man, bleeding and broken in the mud, miles from home. The magnificent red machine that had been his identity was now just a broken toy. The rage, the hatred, the need for vengeance, it all drained away, leaving him feeling hollow and foolish. He looked at Von Adler, and for the first time, he didn't see the Albatros. He saw a mirror. He saw the same exhaustion, the same weight of command, the same loss of friends, the same haunted look he saw in his own eyes every morning. Slowly, deliberately, Jack lowered the pistol and holstered it. He wasn't here to kill a man. He was here to rescue one that the silence between them was thicker than the mud. Von Adler watched, his blue eyes wide with a confusion that cut deeper than any insult. The great rival, the man who had chased him with murderous intent for weeks, had just holstered his gun. "Your arm is broken," Jack said, his voice rough, cutting through the quiet. It wasn't a question. Von Adler glanced down at his left arm, which he cradled against his chest. "I believe so." The landing was less than graceful. He tried to shrug, but winced. "Your head is bleeding, American." Jack reached up, his gloved fingers coming away sticky with blood from the gash on his forehead. He had forgotten. "It's nothing." He moved forward, his boots making a sucking sound in the muck. He stopped a few feet from the German. This close, he could see the lines of stress around the man's eyes, the youth that was usually hidden by the helmet and goggles. He wasn't some ancient, mythical warrior. He was maybe 25. "Can you walk?" Jack asked. "I can try." Von Adler shifted, pushing himself off the wing with his good arm. His legs buckled as he hit the ground, and he let out a sharp, involuntary gasp of pain. His right ankle was clearly twisted or broken. This was impossible. They were sitting ducks in the middle of no man's land. A single German or French sniper in the trenches a few hundred yards away could pick them off. A random artillery shell could vaporize them. Jack's mind raced. He couldn't carry him. He couldn't leave him. He looked at his own plane, then back at the wrecked Albatros. An insane idea, the kind that only comes when all sane options are gone, began to form. "We need to get you to my plane," Jack said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Von Adler let out a short, pained laugh. "To what end? A prison camp? I think I prefer the mud." "No," Jack said, kneeling down. "I'm not taking you prisoner." He met the German's bewildered gaze. "I'm getting you out of here." He saw the understanding dawn, followed by sheer disbelief. "You are mad." "Probably," Jack grunted. "Now, put your good arm around my shoulders." It was an agonizing, clumsy process. Jack, smaller but wiry and strong, hauled the taller German ace to his feet. Von Adler bit down on a cry of pain as his weight came down on the injured ankle. Together, they began a slow, hobbling pilgrimage through the cratered landscape toward the waiting Newport. Every step was a gamble, every second an eternity. Jack kept expecting to hear the crack of a rifle. When they finally reached the Daisy Cutter, both men were panting, covered in mud and sweat. The problem was now brutally simple. A Newport was a single-seat aircraft. "This is where your plan fails, my friend," Von Adler said, leaning heavily against the fuselage. Jack didn't answer. He was already moving, his hands working with a frantic certainty. Using his knife, he began cutting away the canvas and rigging wires from the rear section of the fuselage, just behind the cockpit. It wasn't a seat. It was a desperate perch, a hollow in the plane's skeleton. "You cannot be serious," Von Adler whispered, watching him. "The weight, the balance, you will kill us both." "You got a better idea?" Jack shot back, not stopping his work. "You want to stay here and explain to your own infantry why you landed in no man's land?" The German fell silent. There was no better idea. The space was ready. It was a tight, exposed niche, but it would have to do. "Get in," Jack ordered. Somehow, with a combination of pushing, pulling, and sheer will, they managed to get Von Adler wedged into the makeshift rear compartment. He was curled up, his broken arm held tight, his face pale with pain and the sheer absurdity of the situation. Jack took off his own scarf and tied the German as securely as he could to the frame. "Don't move," he said. "If you shift your weight, we'll spin in." He then climbed into his own cockpit, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was suicide. The plane was never meant for this. He said a prayer to whatever God watched over foolish pilots and turned the ignition. The gnome engine sputtered to life. The sound was like a dinner bell to the trenches. Almost immediately, a rifle shot snapped past, then another. They'd been spotted. "Here we go," Jack yelled, and he shoved the throttle wide open. The Newport, overburdened and unbalanced, lurched forward. It felt heavy, sluggish, like trying to take off in wet cement. It bounced over the rough ground, the landing gear groaning in protest. Jack pulled back on the stick, but the nose didn't want to come up. They were running out of field. A line of shell craters loomed ahead. "Come on, Daisy. Come on," he pleaded. With a final, desperate heave, he felt the wheels leave the ground. They were airborne, but barely. The plane wallowed, unstable, flying just feet above the blasted earth. A machine gun from the German lines now opened up, tracer fire zipping around them. Jack weaved as best he could, feeling the plane respond with a drunken laziness. Then, they were over the French trenches. He saw soldiers pointing, their faces masks of shock. He kept the nose down, building up speed, the extra weight making the controls feel like he was wrestling a bull. Slowly, painfully, the Daisy Cutter began to climb. The flight back was the longest of Jack's life. Every bump of turbulence, every slight turn, threatened to send them into an irreversible spin. He could feel Von Adler's presence behind him, a silent, breathing weight. He didn't dare look back. When the Lafayette airfield finally came into view, he didn't make a graceful approach. He came in fast and low, basically falling out of the sky. He cut the engine and let the plane belly land in the grass, skidding to a jarring halt just short of the hangars. For a moment, there was only the sound of his own ragged breathing and the ping of cooling metal. Then, he heard voices shouting, the sound of running feet. He turned in his cockpit. Von Adler was still there, tied to the frame, alive. His eyes were closed, but he was breathing. The ground crew and his fellow pilots surrounded the plane, their faces a mixture of awe and utter confusion. As they carefully extracted the German ace from his precarious perch, Von Adler's eyes fluttered open. They found Jack's. He didn't speak. He simply raised his good hand, the one that had once tapped the helmet in contempt and later saluted in respect. This time, it wasn't a gesture of rivalry or acknowledgement. It was a slow, deliberate fist placed over his heart. A silent, profound thank you. They carried Von Adler away on a stretcher, to a doctor, to a prison camp, to whatever came next. Jack stood by his battered, mud-spattered plane, watching them go. The fire of his hatred was gone, extinguished not by violence, but by an act of impossible mercy. He hadn't just downed the Albatros. He had, for a fleeting moment, tamed the war itself. And in the echoing silence left behind, he knew the ghost that had haunted him was finally at peace. The dance was over. The end.